Welcome back to the deep dive. Ever looked at a business plan and, wondered exactly how they figure out that magic moment they stop losing money?
Mm.
Well, this deep dive is for you. We're going straight into operational planning today.
Mm.
Cost volume profit analysis, CVP.
Yep.
Our mission, to get a real grip fast on how this whole performance management thing is built. We're looking at it from a manager's viewpoint, not just definitions.
Exactly. And the material we're drawing on this performance management stuff, it gives us two really clear goals. First, nail the core concepts,
Yeah.
break-even point and margin of safety, total clarity.
Okay.
Second, understand how to actually do the CVP analysis, both for like a simple single product and then the much, much trickier multi-product situation.
Right. CVP is basically the crystal ball for your short-term decisions, isn't it?
Yeah.
And looking at our source material, it seems like we can break it down into maybe 3 big pillars.
Yeah, that sounds right.
First, the mathematical approach, that gives us the hard numbers, the risk. Second, the visual approach, the charts,
Yeah.
communication tools. And third, multi-product analysis. That's the real-world application, right? Where it gets complex.
That's a great way to structure it.
Okay, so let's unpack this, starting with the math. The engine room of the whole system.
Okay, so talking math, there are basically 5 key pieces that make CVP work. They all link together, but the absolute anchor is the first one, the break-even point.
Right.
It's simply the sales level could be in units, could be in dollars, where your total money coming in exactly covers all your costs. 0 profit, 0 loss.
That's the knife edge. But interestingly, right next to the break-even point, our sources list simplifying assumptions. That feels important, putting it right there. The math only works if we assume certain things.
That's spot on, and it's critical to get this up front. The list of assumptions is, well, pretty long. But the big ones are assuming you can neatly split all costs into fixed or variable, assuming your selling price per unit never changes, no matter how many you sell, assuming efficiency stays constant.
Seems a bit unrealistic.
They are definitely simplifying assumptions. Necessary evils, maybe. They create the clean slate for the CVP formula to actually work. But you're right to flag them now, because these exact assumptions, they pop up again later as the main limitations of the whole model.
Okay. So the tool kind of relies on this perfect, predictable world, which, let's face it, isn't reality. Fascinating. Okay, so moving on. What's the engine calculating that break-even point? It has to be contribution, right?
Absolutely. Contribution is your cornerstone. It's just revenue minus your variable costs.
The costs that change with volume, materials, direct labor.
Exactly. So contribution is the cash left over after paying for the direct costs of making or selling each item. And that leftover amount is what goes towards covering your fixed costs, rent, salaries, that kind of thing, and then eventually building profit.
Right.
Managers love contribution because it shows the profitability of each sale, stripping out the big shared fixed costs for a moment.
But for strategic planning, the real leverage seems to come when we turn that into a percentage. The fourth element, the contribution sales ratio, or CS ratio.
Precisely. This isn't just another number. It's arguably the most powerful metric in the CVP toolkit.
Why is that?
The CS ratio tells you the percentage of every single sales dollar that's immediately free to cover fixed costs and then become profit. So if your ratio is, say, 40%, it means for every dollar of sales revenue, 40 cents drops straight down towards covering fixed costs and generating profit. It really shifts how managers think compared to just looking at gross profit. The CS ratio shows the speed of profit generation once you're past break-even.
Okay. That's the key takeaway then. Knowing the CS ratio is like knowing how quickly your profit engine accelerates after you hit that 0 point. Good stuff. And the last piece of the math puzzle, the practical measure margin of safety?
Yes, the margin of safety, MOS. This is the cushion. It's the difference between your actual or budgeted sales and your break-even sales point.
So how much things can go wrong before you start bleeding cash?
Exactly. It measures how far sales can fall before the company hits that break-even point and starts making a loss. If your margin of safety is like only 5%, that plan has almost 0 room for error.
Right.
It forces a conversation immediately. Do we need to cut costs? Can we raise prices? What's the strategy?
That makes sense. It's the practical risk gauge. The math tells you where the danger line is. Margin of safety tells you how far you are from it. Crucial.
And that's a perfect segue, actually. Once we have these numbers break even, CS ratio, margin of safety, the next step is communication. How do we show this to the team, to stakeholders? Which brings us to the visual tools, the chart.
Yeah, numbers are vital, but pictures stick, right? They give you those aha moments.
Oh, yeah.
So what are the two main charts our sources highlight for CVP?
Well, the first one is probably the one most people have seen, the break-even chart.
The classic.
The classic. Standard graph, you plot your total cost line, usually starting from your fixed cost level on the y-axis and sloping up. Then you plot your total revenue line, usually starting from 0 and sloping up steeper, hopefully. Where those two lines cross, that's your break-even point. Visually clear. Above the crossing point is profit, below is loss. Managers can see it instantly.
Great for the big picture, definitely. But the sources also mention a second chart, maybe a bit more specialized. The contribution volume chart. How's that different? What extra insight does it offer?
Good question. The contribution volume chart, or CV chart, shifts the focus a bit. Instead of plotting total revenue and total costs, it often plots the profit or contribution directly against the sales volume.
Okay.
Sometimes the horizontal axis represents zero profit loss, and the line shows cumulative profit climbing as volume increases, starting from a negative position representing the fixed costs. Its value is that it really isolates the relationship between volume and profit.
Ah, I see.
It makes it super quick for a manager to see the marginal impact of selling more units or the danger of sales dropping without the clutter of the total cost and total revenue lines. It focuses purely on profitability changes.
So maybe the standard break-in chart is for the annual board meeting presentation.
Yeah, perhaps.
While the contribution volume chart is the tool you'd use in the monthly operations review. More tactical.
That's a good way to think about it. One's broad, one's more focused on the profit driver.
Okay, makes sense. Now, here's where things get, well, really interesting, I think. Most businesses don't just sell one thing, do they? They've got a mix of products.
Rarely just one, no.
Which brings us to Pillar 3, multi-product analysis. How does CVP handle that complexity? Because that feels like the reality for most managers.
Right, and this is where CVP proves its worth in more complex settings, but it definitely gets more complicated mathematically when you have multiple products, each potentially with a different selling price, different variable costs, and therefore a different contribution margin.
You can't just average things out simply, can you?
No, you can't just add up the break-even points or average the CS ratios easily. It doesn't work like that. And you need a way to handle the mix.
So we need a specific calculation method. The sources mention this. What's involved?
Essentially, you have to calculate a weighted average contribution ratio for the company as a whole.
Weighted average,
Yeah.
meaning you factor in how much of each product you sell.
Exactly. You take the contribution margin ratio for product A, multiply it by its share of the total sales mix, do the same for product B, product C, and so on. Add those weighted figures up, and you get a single overall CS ratio for the company based on that assumed sales mix. This weighted average then lets the planning manager calculate one overall breaking point in terms of total sales revenue for the company.
Okay, I get the math, sort of. But let's be practical. For a manager needing to make quick calls like, should we push the high-margin widget or the high-volume gadget this week, does that complex weighted calculation become too slow, too cumbersome for day-to-day use?
That's a really fair challenge, and yes, generally, this weighted average CVP is more of a strategic planning and budgeting tool.
Okay.
It's not typically used for, like, hourly or daily operational tweaks. It helps set the budget, the targets. It forces management to actually agree on a target sales mix for the upcoming period. And here's the catch.
Oh.
If the actual sales mix starts deviating from that planned mix you used in the calculation, your whole CBP analysis, your break-even point, it all becomes inaccurate pretty quickly. That's a major vulnerability we need to circle back to.
Right, because the weights change.
Yeah.
Got it. And visually, when we're dealing with this multi-product world, the simple break-even chart probably doesn't cut it anymore.
Correct. For multi-product scenarios, the sources point us towards using multi-product break-of PV graphs, profit volume graphs.
Okay, PV graphs, what do they show?
They typically plot the total profit or loss against the total sales revenue using that overall weighted average CS ratio we just talked about. It visually represents the break-even point for the entire company's operations, given that specific product mix assumption.
So connecting this to the big picture, this multi-product analysis, even with its complexities, is vital, right? It lets a manager see how sensitive the company's overall profitability is to shifts in what they're selling.
Absolutely. If you decide to push a lower margin product more heavily, that PZ graph, based on the underlying math, will show you that your overall break-in point just jumped higher. You need much more total revenue just to stand still.
It directly links sales strategy and incentives to the bottom line break-even reality.
Precisely. It connects the dots between sales efforts and overall financial health.
Okay. Now, we've built up this CVP architecture, the math, the charts, the multi-product angle. But before we declare it the ultimate tool, we have to talk about the cracks in the foundation. The source material specifically calls out limitations in planning as a key part of understanding CVP.
Yes, and this is maybe the most crucial part for practical application. Because no tool is perfect, right? And what's really interesting here is how the limitations are categorized. They point directly back at the elements we've already discussed.
Which brings us full circle, back to those simplifying assumptions we accepted at the very beginning.
Exactly. That's the first and probably the biggest category of limitations. Remember, we assumed costs split neatly into fixed and variable. In reality, many costs aren't perfectly fixed or perfectly variable, and fixed costs often aren't fixed forever. They're stepped. You hit a certain volume, suddenly you need a bigger factory, another manager.
Boom, your fixed costs jump up significantly.
Right. That step change completely invalidates the linear CVP model you built. Your break-even point shifts dramatically, instantly. Same with the assumption that selling price is constant. What happens when you offer volume discounts?
Your revenue line isn't straight anymore. It curves.
Exactly. It becomes non-linear. So the moment your business scales up or down in ways that aren't perfectly smooth and linear, your basic CVP model starts giving you, well, maybe not lies, but certainly inaccuracies.
Okay, that's a big one. The model breaks when reality gets messy.
Pretty much. And the second major limitation category is the multi-product situations themselves. Even with the weighted averages and the PV graphs, the sheer difficulty of accurately predicting and then maintaining a specific sales mix over a whole period, like a year, that's incredibly tough. Customer demand shifts, competitor actions change things, supply chains hiccup.
So the mix you based your whole plan on might be wrong from week one.
It often is. Predicting that mix is frequently more of a hope or a target than a guaranteed forecast. So the entire multi-product CVP model rests on this foundation that can be, frankly, quite shaky and volatile in practice.
This really raises a critical question then for you listening. If we know we're relying on these simplifying assumptions and we know the multi-product mix is hard to predict, how much extra padding, how much more margin of safety should you build into your plans? It stops being just a buffer against market dips, doesn't it? It also becomes a buffer against the known flaws or inaccuracies within the CVP model itself.
That's a very insightful point. It's like a safety net for the model's own blind spots. You anticipate the model won't be perfect.
So let's quickly recap our deep dive into CVP analysis. We've looked at the three core parts of its architecture for performance management planning. First, the mathematical tools break even, those crucial simplifying assumptions, contribution, the powerful CS ratio, and the practical margin of safety.
Right, the calculation engine.
Second, the charts, the classic break-even chart for overall view, and the more focused contribution volume chart for seeing profit impacts, the visual communicators.
Making it understandable.
And third, the necessary complexity of multi-product application, using weighted averages and PV graphs to handle real-world business mixes.
Dealing with reality.
And crucially, woven throughout, we've stressed the importance of recognizing the limitations, primarily stemming from those very simplifying assumptions and the inherent challenges of multi-product forecasting.
Yes, the elegance is there, but it's fragile. You need to use it with awareness.
Okay, so for our final thought, something for you to chew on after this.
Given that our source material explicitly lists simplifying assumptions as both a core part of the CVP calculation and a major limitation, think about this. Which of those key mathematical concepts we discussed, the break-even point itself, the contribution sales ratio, or the margin of safety, which one do you think is the most vulnerable, the most likely to give you a misleading number when those assumptions inevitably start to crumble in a fast-changing market? Which calculation relies most heavily on things like cost staying perfectly fixed or variable, or the sales mix holding steady? Something to ponder as you think about applying CVP in the real world.